You already knew something was wrong. You just could not name it yet. So when he said you were too sensitive, you did not argue. You apologized. Read that again. You apologized for having feelings that someone else caused. This is not sensitivity. This is a script. 6 phrases. And once you hear them, you will recognize every person who has ever made you feel like you were the problem. A woman named Claire works in corporate marketing. She is 34 years old. She manages 12 people. Claire says these 6 phrases without thinking anymore. They have become reflexive. They are her toolkit. The first phrase is this one. You're too sensitive. Here is what it really means. Your emotional response is getting in the way of what I need right now. Psychologist Harriet Lerner spent years studying apologies and why some people never seem to offer them. She found something critical. People who use this phrase are deliberately pathologizing your normal human response. You felt hurt. That is not sensitivity. That is a nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. But the phrase, "you're too sensitive," reframes your response as a character flaw, not a legitimate emotion. Now here is the part nobody tells you. The people who use this phrase are often the most emotionally aware people in the room. They read you perfectly, and then they weaponize it. That is not a mistake. That is a choice. The second phrase is, "I never said that." This one operates differently. You remember the conversation clearly. You remember the words. You remember the context. And then, they deny it happened. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus conducted groundbreaking research on memory and manipulation. She discovered that repeated denials actually begin to corrupt your own memory of the event. You doubt yourself. And doubt is the goal. Because once you doubt yourself, you stop trusting your perception, and you start trusting theirs. Read that again. The phrase, "I never said that," is not denying words. It is denying your reality. A man named Ryan spent 3 years arguing with his girlfriend about conversations he knew had happened. At first he kept screenshots, then voice notes, then entire message threads. Not because he was obsessive, because he was starting to believe he might be losing his mind. Years later he said something chilling. "I wasn't collecting evidence against her. I was collecting evidence against my own doubt." And that is what manipulation does. It doesn't just change what happened. It changes what you trust. The third phrase is this. Everyone agrees with me. This phrase uses a crowd to isolate you, not through direct attack, through consensus. Psychologist Solomon Asch conducted his famous conformity study in the 1950s. He showed that when people hear others agreeing with a statement, they often adopt that belief even when they know it is false. The phrase, "everyone agrees with me," activates that same mechanism. Suddenly, you are not disagreeing with one person. You are disagreeing with an entire group, and your brain registers that as a threat to belonging. So you stay silent, or you conform. But here's the phrase psychologists consider even more dangerous. Because unlike the others, it doesn't attack you directly. It turns your own kindness into the weapon. The fourth phrase will break something in how you see relationships. Here it is. You should be grateful. This phrase weaponizes your own goodness against you. You did something kind. And now that kindness has been converted into debt. Psychologist Robert Cialdini mapped the psychology of obligation and reciprocity. He found that when someone gives with conditions, those conditions become invisible chains. You remember every gift, every favor, every moment they helped, and you carry them like a weight around your neck. That weight is not gratitude. That is manipulation. Because gratitude is freely given. What you are carrying was never freely given at all. Here is where it gets stranger. The fifth phrase is short. Just 5 words. I was just joking. This one is a reset button. You felt hurt by what they said. You addressed it. And suddenly they reframed the entire interaction. It was a joke. You did not get it. You are overreacting. What just happened was not a mistake. Researcher Joe McLeod studied humor and cruelty in close relationships. He discovered that repeated jokes targeting the same insecurity create a pattern of wounding disguised as play. The person being hurt begins to anticipate the joke, and they start shrinking to prevent it. That shrinking is the goal, because a smaller version of you is easier to control. The sixth phrase is the most dangerous. It sounds like this. If you loved me, you would. This phrase attaches your love to compliance. It says your care is only real if you do what they want. Psychologist Lundy Bancroft studied coercive control in intimate relationships. He found that this phrase specifically creates a psychological binding where love becomes conditional on surrender. Not on growth. Not on partnership. On surrender. You begin to measure your love by how much you are willing to abandon yourself, and they measure theirs by how much they can take. That is not a relationship. That is a claim. Now here is what matters. You have heard at least one of these phrases in the last 30 days. Maybe from someone you trust. Maybe from someone you love. Maybe from yourself. The recognizing these phrases is not the same as being free, but it is where freedom starts. Because a phrase that you name is a phrase that you can refuse. And a phrase that you refuse is no longer invisible. Your nervous system remembers every one of these moments. Not your imagination. Your body. You felt the shift. You felt the reframe. You felt the small version of yourself shrinking. That memory is data, not dysfunction. The work is not forgetting. The work is recognizing the pattern before you are already inside it. You are not broken. You are wired for trust. And someone learned to use that against you. That is not weakness. That is a human being who trusted the wrong person. Think about the last time you heard one of these phrases. Not from someone else, from yourself. Because the most dangerous manipulator isn't always the person standing in front of you. Sometimes it's the voice you've repeated so many times you started believing it was your own. Maybe that's where this begins. Not with blaming them, with noticing the pattern, and refusing to carry it forward. Leave below the phrase that changed how you see people. Because someone reading your comment may finally realize they were never the problem. Being seen is the first step to coming home.